A reclusive mechanic, drowning in grief, never expected a blizzard to change his life forever. But when he spotted a stranded woman on the icy road, he made a split-second decision, one that would unravel a secret forcing him to confront his own shattered past. This is more than a rescue, it's a story of redemption, hidden truths, and the healing power of unexpected connections. Before we dive in, hit subscribe, smash that like button, and turn on notifications. Stories like this remind us all of the light waiting in life's darkest storms. The storm. The wind howled like a wounded animal, tearing through the frozen pines as Ethan Cole clenched the steering wheel of his rusted Ford pickup. Snowflakes battered the windshield, each one a tiny bullet in the war between man and storm. It had been 3 years since the accident, 3 years since the icy road had taken his younger brother, Kyle. And yet, here he was, driving the same stretch of Montana highway on the anniversary of that night, as if punishing himself for surviving. His hands, calloused from years of turning wrenches in his auto shop, trembled slightly. The heater barely fought off the cold, but the chill inside him ran deeper. He hadn't spoken more than a dozen words to anyone today. Just like every other December 14th. Movement. A flash of red in the swirling white. Brake lights. Ethan squinted through the storm. A sedan, half buried in a snowdrift, hazards blinking weakly. His foot eased onto the brake, his truck skidding slightly before stopping. For a long moment he sat there, debating. He wasn't the kind of man who went looking for trouble. These days he barely went looking for conversation. But then he saw her. A woman, gloved hands pressed against the fogged-up window, her breath coming in panicked bursts. Their eyes met through the glass, wide, desperate. Something in that look hooked into Ethan's chest and pulled. It was the same look Kyle had given him that night, just before the crash. A silent plea. A last hope. "Damn it," he muttered, shoving open the door. The cold hit him like a slap, stealing his breath as he trudged toward the stranded car. Snow soaked through his boots instantly. The woman, early 30s, dark hair escaping from a knit hat, rolled down the window just enough to shout over the wind. "My engine died. I can't get it started." Ethan didn't answer. He yanked on the door handle, but the frame was wedged shut by snow. With a grunt, he shoved his shoulder against it until it gave way. The woman scrambled out, clutching a small duffel bag and something else. A photograph, edges crumpled in her grip. "Get in the truck," he ordered, already turning back. She didn't argue. Inside the cab, the woman hunched over, rubbing her arms. "Thank you," she breathed, voice shaking. "I thought I was going to freeze to death out there." Ethan cranked the heat higher. "Silver Pines is another 10 miles. You got someone expecting you?" The pause. "Too long." "No," she said finally. "Just passing through." Bullshit. Ethan knew a lie when he heard one. But he wasn't in the business of prying. He put the truck in drive. Then her phone buzzed. She flinched, digging it out of her pocket. The screen lit up with a caller ID, Dr. Mercer. Her thumb hovered over the decline button before she stuffed it away, unanswered. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, but his grip on the wheel tightened. People didn't panic over phone calls unless they had a reason. "You in some kind of trouble?" he asked. The woman, Lena, she'd said her name was, stared at the photo in her hands. A little boy, grinning in sunlight. "Yeah," she whispered, "but not the kind you can fix with a tow rope." The snow kept falling. The wind kept screaming. And Ethan Cole, who had spent 3 years drowning in regret, felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. The need to help. The need to fix something for once. He didn't know it yet, but this storm was just the beginning. And that phone call? That was the first thread of a secret about to unravel everything. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting flickering shadows across the cramped cabin. Ethan tossed another log onto the flames, sending up a spray of orange sparks. He could feel Lena's eyes on him as he worked, studying him with a mixture of gratitude and wariness that set his teeth on edge. "You live here alone?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the wind rattling the window panes. Ethan grunted in response, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. The cabin wasn't much, just a single room with a kitchenette in one corner and his army cot in the other. Tools and auto parts cluttered every available surface. It smelled like motor oil and would smoke. Lena sat hunched on the rickety stool by the fire, clutching the chipped mug of coffee he'd given her. Her wet hair hung in dark strands around her face, and her clothes still steamed slightly from the heat. The photograph she'd been carrying lay face down on the table beside her, as if she couldn't bear to look at it. Ethan busied himself at the sink, scrubbing at a stubborn grease stain. He wasn't good at this, at having people in his space. At talking. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. "That your kid?" he finally asked, nodding toward the photo. Lena's fingers twitched toward it instinctively before pulling back. "Not anymore," she said, so quiet he almost missed it. The words hung in the air between them. Ethan turned off the faucet with more force than necessary, the pipes groaning in protest. He'd known plenty of deadbeat parents in his time, folks who'd walked out on their families without a second glance. But there was something in Lena's voice that didn't fit that mold. A raw, jagged edge of pain that sounded familiar. "Adoption?" he ventured, leaning against the counter. Lena's laugh was bitter and sharp. "That's what the paperwork says." Outside, the wind howled around the eaves like a living thing. The fire popped, sending up another shower of sparks. Ethan studied the woman in front of him, the way her shoulders tensed at every noise, how her fingers kept tracing the rim of her mug like she was counting the cracks in the ceramic. He was about to press further when a new sound cut through the storm, the crunch of tires on gravel. Lena went rigid. The color drained from her face so fast Ethan thought she might pass out. Her mug slipped from numb fingers, hitting the floorboards with a dull thud. Coffee spread in a dark stain across the wood. "They found me," she whispered. Ethan moved to the window before he'd even processed the words. Peering through the grimy glass, he could just make out the shape of a black SUV idling at the end of his driveway. Its headlights cut twin beams through the swirling snow, the engine running. "Waiting." "Who's they?" Ethan asked, his voice low. Lena didn't answer. When he turned back, she was clutching the photograph to her chest, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, the kind of primal terror that comes from knowing the monster is real, and it's right outside your door. A sharp rap at the door made them both jump. "Lena Vasquez?" called a smooth male voice from the porch. "We know you're in there. Let's not make this difficult." Ethan felt his muscles tense, his body shifting automatically into a defensive stance. Years of bar fights and back-alley brawls had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. He shot Lena a questioning look, but she was already shaking her head violently, her eyes wide with warning. The knock came again, harder this time. "We just want to talk, Lena. About Daniel." At the mention of the name, something in Lena snapped. She surged to her feet, the stool clattering to the floor behind her. "Stay away from him," she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. "You have no right." The silence that followed was heavier than the snow piling up outside. Ethan could practically hear the gears turning in the stranger's head on the other side of the door. When the voice spoke again, it had lost all pretense of civility. "Open this door, or we'll open it for you." Ethan made his decision in an instant. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and grabbed the baseball bat leaning against the wall by his cot. The wood felt familiar in his hands, its weight comforting. "Get in the bathroom," he told Lena, nodding toward the narrow door in the corner. "Lock it. Don't come out until I say so." Lena hesitated, her gaze darting between Ethan and the front door. "You don't understand what they're capable of," she whispered. Ethan adjusted his grip on the bat and offered her a grim smile. "Neither do they." The pounding started again, harder now. The door frame shuddered with each impact. Ethan could hear muffled voices arguing outside, then the distinct sound of metal scraping against metal. They were coming in. As Lena disappeared into the bathroom, Ethan positioned himself beside the door, bat raised. His pulse hammered in his ears, drowning out even the storm. The last thing he saw before the door burst open was the photograph Lena had left on the table, the smiling face of a little boy who looked nothing like her, but who she clearly loved enough to run through a blizzard for. Then the world exploded into noise and motion. The door splintered inward with a crash, sending wood shards skittering across the floor. Cold air and snow swirled into the cabin as two men in dark overcoats shoved their way inside. The first was built like a linebacker, his shaved head glistening with melting snow. The second was leaner, his expensive wool coat and polished shoes looking out of place in Ethan's ramshackle cabin. Dr. Mercer. Ethan didn't wait for introductions. He swung the bat in a tight arc, catching the bigger man square in the ribs with a satisfying thud. The goon grunted, stumbling back into Mercer, who barely managed to sidestep the collision. "You've got 3 seconds to turn around and walk away," Ethan growled, adjusting his grip on the bat. Mercer smoothed his coat, his lips curling into a patronizing smile. "This doesn't concern you, mister?" "Cool. And everything that happens in my home concerns me." The big man had recovered, rubbing his side with a murderous glare. Mercer held up a hand to restrain him. "We're here for Ms. Vasquez. She's in violation of a legally binding contract." From behind the bathroom door came Lena's muffled shout. "I signed those papers under duress. You threatened to call immigration." Mercer's smile didn't waver. "Difficult to prove in court, don't you think?" He reached inside his coat, and for a heart-stopping moment Ethan thought he was going for a gun. Instead, he produced a sleek leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a professional ID. "Northern Valley Adoption Services. Everything we do is above board." Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough shady operators in his time to recognize the type, the kind who wrapped their predation in legal jargon and expensive suits. The bat didn't waver. "You brought muscle to collect a paperwork violation?" The big man cracked his knuckles. "We can do this easy or—" Ethan swung again. This time the bat connected with the man's forearm, drawing a howl of pain. Mercer scrambled back as his enforcer lunged forward, tackling Ethan into the kitchenette. Pots and pans clattered to the floor as they crashed into the counter. Ethan drove an elbow into the man's kidney, twisting free just in time to see Mercer making for the bathroom. He grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the floor and hurled it with all his strength. The pan struck Mercer between the shoulder blades, sending him sprawling face-first onto Ethan's cot. The bigger man was on him again, meaty hands closing around Ethan's throat. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision as he was slammed against the wall. Through the roaring in his ears, he heard the bathroom door burst open. "Stop. Just stop." Lena screamed. "I'll go with you, just don't hurt him." Ethan drove his knee upward, catching his attacker square in the groin. As the man doubled over, Ethan brought both fists down on the back of his neck, sending him crashing to the floorboards. Mercer had regained his feet, his perfect hair now disheveled. He reached into his coat again, this time producing a small silver revolver. The barrel gleamed in the firelight as he leveled it at Ethan's chest. "Enough," Mercer hissed. His polished facade had cracked, revealing something ugly beneath. "That boy has new parents now. Wealthy ones who paid good money for a healthy infant with no strings attached. You think some backwoods mechanic and a cleaning lady can fight that kind of power?" Lena made a strangled sound, her hands pressed to her mouth. Ethan could see the truth of it now, the years of fear and desperation in her eyes. The photo of her son clutched in her trembling fingers. The gun didn't waver. "Walk away, Mr. Cole. This isn't your fight." Ethan spat blood onto the floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He thought of Kyle's funeral. The empty casket. All the times he'd wished for one more chance to make things right. He met Lena's terrified gaze and made his choice. Like hell it isn't. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the fire poker from the hearth and swung. The gun went off with a deafening crack as the red-hot metal connected with Mercer's wrist. The revolver clattered across the floor as Mercer screamed, clutching his burned flesh. Ethan didn't hesitate. He drove his shoulder into Mercer's stomach, bulldozing him back through the ruined doorway and out into the snow. The lawyer landed hard on his back, his breath coming out in a white puff. The big man was stirring inside, groaning as he tried to rise. Ethan turned to Lena, who stood frozen in shock. "Keys," he demanded. "Where are your car keys?" She blinked, then patted her pockets frantically before pointing to her duffel bag. Ethan snatched it up, digging through until his fingers closed around cold metal. "Get in the truck," he ordered, tossing her the keys. "We're getting your son back." Mercer was struggling to sit up in the snowbank, his face contorted with pain and rage. "You'll never win this. We have lawyers. Judges." Ethan loomed over him, the fire poker still glowing faintly in his grip. "You should have brought more than one hired thug." As he turned to follow Lena, the first sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have heard the gunshot. They had minutes at most before the police arrived. The storm had eased slightly, the snow now falling in fat, lazy flakes. Ethan's truck idled in the driveway, exhaust pluming in the cold air. Lena already sat in the passenger seat, her face pale but determined. Ethan spared one last glance at his ruined cabin, at the two men groaning in the snow. Then he climbed behind the wheel and threw the truck into gear. Somewhere out there in the storm was a little boy who needed his mother. And Ethan Cole had already failed one family. He wouldn't fail another. The truth that heals. The tires crunched over fresh snow as Ethan guided the truck down the winding suburban street. Christmas lights twinkled from the eaves of neatly kept houses, their cheerful glow at odds with the tension gripping the cab. Lena sat stiff beside him, her fingers worrying the edges of the photograph she'd pulled from her pocket. "Third house on the left," she whispered. Ethan eased the truck to a stop across the street from a modest two-story home with a wreath on the door and a plastic snowman grinning from the yard. Through the front window, he could see the flickering blue light of a television. Lena didn't move. For a long moment, she simply stared at the house, her breath fogging the passenger window. Ethan could see the tremor in her hands, the way her throat worked as she swallowed hard. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. She turned to him then, her dark eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "After all this time, what if he doesn't remember me?" Ethan killed the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy, pressing in around them. "Then you remind him." They crossed the street together, their boots leaving dark prints in the pristine snow. The porch light flickered on as they reached the steps, casting long shadows behind them. Ethan could feel Lena's hesitation radiating off her in waves. Before they could knock, the door swung open. A woman in her late 40s stood framed in the doorway, her expression shifting from surprise to recognition to something like sorrow in the span of a heartbeat. "Lena," she breathed. "Mrs. Calloway." Lena's voice was barely audible. "I need to see my son." The woman, Daniel's foster mother, glanced over her shoulder before stepping onto the porch and pulling the door nearly closed behind her. "It's nearly his bedtime," she said softly. "And after last time?" Ethan saw Lena flinch as if struck. "Please. Just 5 minutes. I have proof now, recordings of Mercer admitting they coerced me into signing those papers." A floorboard creaked inside the house. Mrs. Calloway turned just as a small figure appeared in the gap between the door and frame. Daniel. He was smaller than Ethan had imagined from the photograph, his dark hair sticking up in sleep musk tufts. One hand clutched a well-loved teddy bear, the other rubbed at his sleepy eyes. Then those eyes focused on Lena. For one heart-stopping second, no one moved. No one breathed. "Mama?" The word shattered the stillness like a gunshot. Lena fell to her knees as the boy launched himself into her arms, his small hands clutching at her coat. She buried her face in his hair, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Mrs. Calloway pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes glistening. "He's asked for you every night," she admitted quietly. "We told him you were working far away." Ethan took a step back, suddenly feeling like an intruder on this intimate moment. But Lena reached out without looking, her fingers closing around his wrist with surprising strength. Daniel pulled back slightly, studying Ethan with solemn curiosity. "Are you a policeman?" Ethan huffed a quiet laugh, crouching to meet the boy's gaze. "Just a mechanic, kid." "He's a hero," Lena corrected, brushing tears from Daniel's cheeks with trembling fingers. "He helped me find my way back to you." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the night. Ethan straightened, his muscles tensing. Mrs. Calloway touched his arm. "My husband called the police when he saw your truck. But maybe you should come inside while we sort this out." As they stepped into the warm house, Ethan caught sight of the family photos lining the hallway, Daniel grinning on a swing set, Daniel dressed for his first day of school, Daniel sandwiched between the Calloways, beaming with happiness. For the first time in 3 years, the knot of guilt in Ethan's chest loosened just a little. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is help a stranger, because in saving them, we might just save ourselves too. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of courage and redemption. The firelight glowed warm against the windows as the police cruiser pulled up outside. But for the first time in a long time, Ethan wasn't afraid of what came next. Because some things, like family, like love, were worth fighting for. The end.